Hi, this is Angela, creator of Upswing Baby Names, the place to find names ahead of the curve. This is the second part of a two-part series. If you missed part 1 and you found this on YouTube, you can see it by clicking on the link in the description below. A quick review of part 1 is I'm responding to a reader, Jennifer, who was concerned that the name she likes for a boy, Elliot, could go the way of the girls. She is okay with giving her son a unisex name, but she wants to avoid naming her son the next Ashley. The findings in part 1 suggest that Elliot isn't in danger of becoming the next Ashley, but could possibly become the next Aubrey. More on that in a bit. But there's still hope. Elliot could possibly become the next Avery, Jordan, or Morgan. These are unisex names that might be slightly more imaginable on girls, but are still socially acceptable on boys as well. Let's see how Elliot compares to those names. Let's review the 3 types of boys' names used on girls. First are the mostly feminine names, such as Addison, Ashley, and Aubrey. Next are the mostly unisex names, such as Avery, Jordan, and Morgan. Lastly are the mostly masculine names, such as Jason and Michael. But before we do that, for the benefit of those who missed part 1, here are the findings. We saw that Addison and Ashley were never terribly popular on boys, unlike Elliot. However, Aubrey was once more popular on boys than Elliot, and is now a super hit on girls. Aubrey's transition to the girls took about a generation. Now, let's compare Elliot to mostly unisex names. If you saw part 1, you will note that I added 2 more names to this list, Rowan and Quinn. Like Elliot, Avery was never terribly popular on boys, but has a long history in the boys' top 1,000, an even longer history than Elliot. And while Avery is now more popular on girls, parents haven't given up on Avery for boys. Avery is trending upwards on both genders. Jordan's history as a boy name is also similar to Elliot's, and now the name is almost equally imaginable on boys and girls. In fact, while Jordan is beginning a steep downward trend for girls, for boys it is holding steady. Using my classification, Jordan on a boy is what I would consider a modern name morphing into a modern classic, while Jordan on a girl is a modern name that looks like it could be heading into dated territory within the next 15 to 20 years. This is surprising to me, since I personally know more girls than boys named Jordan. I wonder if there are regional differences here, and that's something I might look into in the future. Nevertheless, this is very encouraging for anyone who prefers Elliot on a boy or as a unisex name. Note the more feminine spelling of Jordan, the one ending in YN, has a recent trend on girls that is very similar to the other spelling's recent trend on boys. But when all spellings are combined, Jordan is still almost twice as popular on boys right now. Based on my impressions, Morgan is just slightly more feminine than masculine. Yet based on the stats, Morgan is clearly a more feminine name. Something to note. Morgan has never left the boys' top 1,000, and like Aubrey in part 1, was actually more popular than Elliot on boys at one point. Perhaps this history on boys keeps Morgan imaginable on boys, even though the stats show Morgan is significantly more popular on girls. However, the name is trending downwards on both genders. Rowan is a modern unisex name, which makes it very different from Elliot, which is the more established name that has been in the boys' top 1,000 for nearly a century. This means Rowan's history might not be a good indicator of what could be in store for Elliot, but Rowan is a good example of a name that is going up in popularities on both genders and is almost equally popular on boys and girls. Quinn is another modern unisex name that, like Rowan, might not be a good predictor of what could happen to Elliot. But Quinn's history on both genders is fascinating. Quinn's popularity on girls quickly surpassed its popularity on boys only recently. 2010 was a pivotal year for Quinn. See where the pink and blue lines cross on the right-hand graph? That's around 2010, when Quinn began its steep decline on boys and rapid ascent on girls. But Quinn is more modern than Elliot. Does Quinn's history give any indication of what could happen to Elliot? I don't think so. Now, let's see how Elliot compares to masculine names that have been used on girls. As you can see, during Jason's popularity peak on boys, it also briefly showed up in the girls' top 1,000. UBN reader Kelly made a good point in the comments to part 1 about data coding errors in the days before computers possibly inflating Jason's rank on girls. Unfortunately, there is no way to tell how many births were coded as the wrong gender. What we do know is that when Jason peaked on girls in 1977, there were 312 Jasons coded as girls. I don't think all 312 were errors. Also note that Jason's popularity on boys during the 1920s was very similar to Elliot's. We know the rest of the story. While Jason soared on boys and went on to become the boy name of the 70s and 80s, Elliot held steady until it got discovered within the past 5 years. Jason very well could have gone the way of Elliot. And here is how Elliot compares to Michael. I'm confident that Michael's popularity on girls is significant, despite any coding errors. But Michael's popularity on boys is much stronger than Elliot's. There really isn't any comparison. Michael is what I consider an authentic classic on boys, meaning it has been consistently popular on boys since the 1880s, never ranking lower than 59. This means the name's popularity on boys is strong enough to withstand a few female births. I included this slide to show that even the most masculine names sometimes get used on a few girls. But what does all of this mean for Elliot's future? Based on the names I've profiled, Elliot's trends are most similar to Avery, Jordan, and Jason. 2 of these names are unisex, and 1 is clearly masculine. Of the 2 unisex names, Avery is the most feminine. While I cannot make any guarantees, this is encouraging to anyone who likes Elliot as a unisex or masculine name. But how did Elliot compare to the gender crossover names covered in part 1, names that have become mostly feminine? Of the crossover names from part 1 that are mostly feminine, Elliot has a very different past. Notice how Elliot has been in the boys' top 1,000 longer than both Addison and Ashley. Elliot is probably most like Aubrey. However, Aubrey was once more popular on boys than Elliot, something that might be discouraging to those who prefer Elliot on boys. And for those of you who are wondering if spelling variations make much of an impact, I'm going to talk about that next. Since Jordan also has a lot of spelling variations, I thought I would compare Elliot and Jordan with their combined spellings. Note, the scales on the 2 charts are different. Jordan is over twice as popular as Elliot on boys. As you can see, even with all of the combined spellings, Elliot is still about 5 times more popular on boys than girls. And Jordan, a name that is currently more popular than Elliot on both genders, is still twice as popular on boys as girls, even with all of its spellings combined. My best guess is that Elliot could be the next Jordan, meaning we will probably see a significant rise in female Elliots. But Elliot will still seem acceptable on a boy. And when the L trend dies down, Elliot could decline on both genders. But due to its history on boys, I don't think it will decline as rapidly on boys. But that's just a guess. So if you are like me and you see Elliot as all boy, the worst case scenario is that Elliot could become the next Aubrey. The best case scenario is that Elliot could become the next Jason. The middle ground, and in my opinion, the most likely scenario, is that Elliot could become the next Jordan. In this case, Jennifer, since you said you were okay giving your son a unisex name, I would encourage you to take a chance and name your son Elliot. Even under the worst case scenario, if Elliot becomes the next Aubrey, I believe that would take about a generation. And at that point, Elliot will be your son to you, and by extension, all boy in your mind. To further explain what I mean, I had always seen Kelly as a girl's name because I grew up with a lot of girls named Kelly. And then I met a guy named Kelly. Suddenly, after meeting just one guy named Kelly, I could see the name on a guy or a girl. And here's the cool thing. Kelly is no less a woman's name to me. Kelly just happens to be my new sister-in-law's name. But the name is a completely different name on a guy than it is on a girl. I can see the same thing happening with Elliot, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I hope this sheds some light on your dilemma, Jennifer, and good luck with everything. And if you enjoyed this video, please share it with your friends. Thank you so much for joining me.